That
Hey,
that makes it official.
yeah. Well, welcome everybody. January 19th, 2023. Happy New Year. We're kicking off 2023 with quite a bit of rain and lots of good stuff for future summer water storage up on the mountain as well. We have a agenda today that really looks at budgets and the FIA. Brian sent out some information on that. We have some work to approve some meeting minutes, and of course want to start with public comments. Before I open to public comments, Brian, I know there was something about attendees and public not being able to see links or not being able to see who's in the meeting. Was any of that resolved? Just to kind of check in on that real quick.
I don't think they'll ever be able to see like participant names. That's not a feature that Zoom offers for the attendees, but yeah, I did figure out in terms of posting things to the chat so that like if we're including links to pages and things like that, did figure out how to make sure everyone can see those.
Oh, I see that now. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So if we're posting to everyone, no, you're posting to everyone, including attendees. You're sending to host and panelists. That's a little housekeeping piece.
Yeah, that's the distinction.
Anybody sign up for public comments?
We do. We had 2 people signed up, but I only see one of them here. So Marita, I'm gonna bring you into the meeting here.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Welcome.
My name is Marita Inglesby. I'm with Southwest Neighborhoods Parks Committee, Friends of Gabriel Park, and also Hayhurst Neighborhood Association. And our groups have become increasingly concerned about tree ivy, particularly along roadways and adjacent to people's houses. And it just seems like in the last year that ivy is overtaking trees and they're going to come down. And we've become, of course, very cognizant of how important our tree canopy is. That includes trees that are healthy and being taken care of. And I wanted to ask the Commission for guidance on what you recommend our groups can do. We're already volunteering in parks, taking down ivy from parks trees, but it's the trees that nobody's paying attention to that are really being not taken care of on private property along roadways. If you drive along Capitol Highway, Beaverton Hillsdale Highway, Shoals Ferry, Twilliger, pretty much anywhere in Southwest Portland, you just see these trees that are they're going to come down. They're just being overtaken, weighted down by ivy. So we wanted to ask some guidance on what we can do. Are there grants? Are there programs, incentive programs, anything that could help launch a program to start taking care of these trees? Thank you.
Thank you, Marita. Very interesting. Yeah, when the leaves are down during winter, you can really see how much ivy is around. As many of you know, invasive species really kind of goes up trunks, chokes trees, and creates a completely different ecosystem. Thoughts, commissioners, on this? Or Jen, Brian, Ashley, any work happening on this at all from the city's perspective? Daniel, you want to start?
Sure, Marita. What you bring up is a huge problem, and my organization has been dealing with this for many years. I would say, unfortunately, it's not a simple problem to fix. However, I mean, there are a couple issues here. One is, how to maybe get together a group of people that might be willing to work on this, which is a separate issue. But in terms of the ivy itself, if there are specific trees, the easiest thing to do is to go in and cut the big ivy vines so that they won't continue to grow and get bigger. And the thing about the ivy vines is they're really hard to get off the trees, but if you wait after you've cut the vines, they will slowly start to lose their ability to stick to the trunks and they can be pulled off later. So I'd say in terms of the actual mechanisms there, that is a potential way. My group, which unfortunately is on the other side of the river, so we can't really help too much. We do organize, sort of work parties, if you want to call them that, to work on specific areas. But I think part of what you're going to end up needing to do is to prioritize, because there's just so much ivy everywhere. There's no way eradication is really a goal. I would say to focus on the areas that are most important and work from there. I might actually want to see what Megan has to say, since she's with Friends of Trees and they work citywide.
Okay, Megan, do you want to contribute to that, or quickly, or maybe start and then
I
go to
can
Bruce?
wait. I can wait for Bruce to go. I want to respect order.
I wondered if these are on roads that are designated as state highways, or are they city streets? Because they're all major. The roads Marita named, a lot of them are major throughways, and I just wondered how many of those are state roads. And if they're state roads, I think it presents more challenges than if they're a city street, if you're dealing with the right of way. But even if it's in the right of way, it's the private property owners. But along like Multnomah Boulevard, there are areas that are, I don't know who owns that stuff right along Multnomah Boulevard. It's an old railroad line, and I can see where ivy would thrive there because it's shady, it's not disturbed, it gets moisture, and nobody does anything with it. And maybe Jen has, I'm not aware of any city program to remove ivy in right of way in public space.
Anybody? Yeah, big problem, challenging to get to. I don't know if we have a direct response or a solution, Marita, on this, but, or at least it sounds like. So I don't know if the city, at least Jen, Brian, is Ashley, a city rep, folks, can you confirm Bruce's observation that there's no city programs directly?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that, but I'm happy to let Megan go and respect order too.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, and I want to defer to Jen and others. I think the reality is that the tree, my understanding is how the city has prioritized some of this, right, is to really focus on early detection, rapid response, and ivy is just so pervasive. So the dedication of funding there is, I think, probably feels like throwing money into a hole, unfortunately. I think for the private property owners, Marita, I would really think about some of this might be finding some small grants to engage, to do outreach to engage property owners and residents. I might consider reaching out to West Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District just to kind of, this is something they clearly care about. They have videos about tree ivy removal, and that might just be an interesting conversation to find out what they're doing already around this. Might be a resource for that. I used to work for Backyard Habitat, which really tries to engage private property owners around that. So it might be worth reaching out to engage in those ways as well. But a big endeavor for certain and important, but I'll pass it to Jen at this point. I did drop a link that in the chat that hopefully people now can see that has some small grant opportunities as well.
Hi, Marita. First, thank you for bringing the topic up, and I'm really grateful that you and your neighbors are noticing this and want to do something about it. And everything that everyone else has said, of course, is accurate. It's a huge issue to tackle, and ivy, of course, is one of the invasive species that's negatively impacting trees across the city. So things that people asked, if I can remember them all. Yeah, Bruce, those rights of way, if there's a rail line involved, then it's probably the rail company, and which one, Union Pacific or otherwise, would need to be identified to access those properties. The larger roads in town are often owned by ODOT, but in effect managed by Portland Bureau of Transportation. So those would be Marita, entities to contact, at least some kind of a communication about the concern to those organizations and what you'd like to see happen there. And the more of those they hear, then the more interest there might be in that kind of activity. And similar to the link in the chat that Megan put in, we have a small grant program also in urban forestry for our neighborhood tree teams. And if you all aren't a neighborhood tree team, maybe you'd like to become one, and there's information on that on our website too. But I could see something like if you wanted to work together in your community, identify the priority areas and develop some kind of outreach campaign to private property owners or the public property owners, the small grant might help you do that if you want to do it. On parks property, there's something called, there's the No Ivy League, which is a volunteer organization that works with parks all over the city removing ivy. It is such a big task that parks really focuses on what we call protecting the best. So trying to work in the areas where they have the highest ecological value and the most opportunity to really abate the ivy that's involved. And I saw somebody else's hand go up.
Yeah, I'd like to keep moving on this because we're out of time here for public comments. So want to make sure we have time for all the other things. Marita, thank you for bringing this up. I know it's a conversation we could have as a group for a very long time. Yeah, and we'll just continue to kind of come back to this, and hopefully the links that folks put on the chat will be helpful for the next steps in with your group.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
And safe travels, Vivek. I hope you
thanks.
have a good trip.
Thanks. I want to move to meeting minutes. Brian sent out meeting minutes earlier in the week, and the real, just to kind of go through that. Are there any amendments that were made, or any other notices of typos or anything like that? Again, Ashley, hugely helpful, incredibly. You didn't do it, or
this time Brian did those minutes.
Yeah, hugely helpful. Thanks, Brian. Anything that we need to note about the minutes? I'd like to call a vote eventually. All right. How about, can I call a vote? Bruce? You're muted.
I sent my comments to Brian. They were minor, but I had one question. I wish we would use scientific names for trees when they're referred to, even if they weren't used in the meeting. But that was a minor. But I don't know if that's deemed important by UFC if they're not used in the meeting. I just think it would look a little better if we use scientific names for trees.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for sending those notes. I would love to see scientific names, but I also think that it could keep people from being able to understand the trees themselves if we're only using scientific names. So maybe
no.
Scientific and common name would be helpful.
Yeah. The other thing in the last line, I know it's a typo, but it was rather amusing, I thought. Vivek concluded that discussion by removing UFC members to send agenda suggestions for future meetings. So we better change that.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I was wondering about that too. Okay, can I call a vote then? Anybody want to put a motion on the table? Roberta?
Thanks. Sorry, I just had one other comment, I guess, on the minutes to the discussion of the urban forest management plan. I think we talked about, or I think I raised maybe the importance of building ownership with the other city bureaus. and engaging with the city council and other commissions to build political support along the way. I think it's real important that we document that the bureaus are not just sort of stakeholders, they need to be owners and implementers of the plan, and I'd like to see that reflected in the minutes. If that's accurate that we said that, I think we talked about that.
Yeah, I recall.
Thank you. And I'm happy to make a motion to adopt them with that change and
Okay.
Bruce's changes, if that's good with the group.
All right, Adrian, is that a second? Okay, great. Adrian seconds. All in favor, virtual or physical hand in the screen? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Any no's, nays? Any abstentions? Okay, so move. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Brian, again for November meeting minutes. Stay tuned for December meeting minutes next month. Kind of moving right along here. We'll turn it over to Jen for the Urban Foresters report.
Thank you, Vivek. Okay, I have for you today, let's see, time provided, 8 items. The first of those is a reminder that earlier this month, Brian sent you all by email an invitation to participate in Parks training called Foundation to Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. That is a no-cost training available in person and virtually to all park staff and you all as commissioners. And the training is the entry offering in a series of newly developed parks diversity, equity, inclusion trainings that have been put together by our workforce development and equity and inclusion professionals with input from many parkies, including urban forestry staff. It's kind of the first of its kind in parks, a really robust arrangement of a variety of different types of trainings around equity and dismantling racism and othering at a variety of different times spread out over really a couple of years. So I wanted to point it out because I see it as a really great opportunity for all of us to build our skill set and exposure and just a knowledge base around the cultural norms that we all experience. So we are always ask you all to participate in at least one anti-racism and anti-othering type training each year. So this one would be an opportunity to do that, as will the others that'll come later. And they're also just good opportunities to develop skills as people in the world. So I encourage you to take advantage, and please contact Brian to register if you're interested in those. And we'll put the schedule for the remaining offerings of that foundation class in the chat. Next item, as you may have seen in the media, Commissioner Dan Ryan is now the Parks Commissioner. Commissioner Ryan's portfolio also includes the Office of Equity and Human Rights, Civic Life, and the city's arts portfolio. As always, Parks and Urban Forestry, as the forest infrastructure managers, work regularly, daily, across city bureaus, such as Bureau of Transportation, Planning and Sustainability, Development Services, Environmental Services, and the Portland Water Bureau. And that's regardless of commissioner assignments, and that will continue. We're also looking into if Commissioner Ryan might attend an upcoming commission meeting to meet you all. And so to that end, maybe I'll just ask right now, if you all could indicate if you might be able to attend the February meeting in person at the Portland building. We'd be best to do that in person, right? If we can. So maybe you could do a show of hands, whether virtual or physical on that, if you think you might be able to.
That would be the 16th of February, Jen.
Yeah, the next regular meeting.
Yep, 9:30 to 11:30.
Yeah. So what do you think? I see Roberta's hand is up. Melinda, Bruce, Daniel, looking good so far. My screen doesn't go that far. Other folks not sure yet. Vivek can do it. Leah.
I'm unfortunately out of town, but could do virtual.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. So that's already a quorum. So we will look to try to do that. Of course, you'll get more information between now and then. See if the commissioner is available, and we've started asking.
In the
If
Lovejoy
not,
room?
we will aim for another meeting.
Back in the Lovejoy room? Wow.
Most likely in the Portland building. We have a lot of meeting spaces here now, and a lot of them are equipped with technology so that we could both host it in person and have a remote option as well.
Okay.
That's right. I haven't been in the Lovejoy room since before the pandemic.
Yes.
Okay, next item, try to keep us on schedule here. The initial stages of the new Portland Clean Energy Fund PSEF Equitable Tree Canopy Initiative continue, which Bureau of Planning and Sustainability and Urban Forestry staff are working together on. And we are creating a structure for Urban Forestry Commission participation in that initiative that is similar to how the PSEF committee is participating in all of the climate improvement or investment plans. Of course, Forestry Commission will be focused on the canopy equity component. So the way we're planning to do that is that PSEF staff will attend commission meetings to provide information, answer questions, discuss, and hear advice from you all. The level of detail and the timeline for the Equitable Canopy Initiative is yet to be determined, so we don't know exactly when the first of those will begin, but I anticipate it will be on our agenda in the next few months. Right now, commission members invited to participate as an observer in the Equitable Canopy Roundtable that's occurring this month. The roundtable informs the development of goals, outcomes, eligibility criteria, and funding levels for the Equitable Canopy Initiative. There are 2 remaining roundtables. Those are next Wednesday morning and the following Wednesday. The first of them was yesterday. PSEF committee members are also invited to participate in the roundtable as an observer. And I especially would like to encourage commissioners who don't have current committee or board memberships or other Forestry Commission representation roles, such as Budget Advisory Committee or Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland, to consider participating if they can on those Wednesdays. So if that's something you're interested and able to do, please let Brian or me know after the meeting, but ideally before next Wednesday, and we'll put the specific dates and times for both of those roundtables in the chat. Next item, the next few months, the commission agenda will include Streets PDX, the street design master planning process led by Bureau of Transportation, and also the trees in the curb zone pilot project. The latter is a partnership between Urban Forestry and Bureau of Transportation, including some funding from a BES grant to design and develop locations and plant large form trees in the curb zone or the area in the roadway that's right adjacent to the curb. So that could be really exciting if that pilot is successful. I wanted to give you also an update on Water Bureau policy. You may recall from previous meetings, Water Bureau currently has a policy prohibiting tree planting within 10 feet of a large pipe, a transmission pipe that's located under a complete street. Complete streets are paved, they have curb and sidewalk. The policy eliminated current otherwise viable street tree planting spaces, and there are many trees currently that have been within 10 feet of these pipes for years. When those need to be removed or fall, those spaces will not be able to be planted again. So that 10-foot separation rule has remained in the Portland Water Bureau administrative rules as the standard and quote unquote ideal separation. However, the Portland Water Bureau chief engineer and her staff committed to working with Urban Forestry on a case-by-case basis to identify how trees can be incorporated into the site when the 10-foot separation can't be achieved. So Water Bureau and Urban Forestry have a draft memorandum of understanding, memorializing that commitment and describing an escalation path. Meantime, since Urban Forestry began working case by case with the engineer, appropriate sized trees have been able to be planted in each case reviewed. So that's a great progress, and gratitude goes to the Urban Forestry permitting and regulation team for their work on that. Last few items. Our appointment of new forestry commissioners is proceeding according to our time plan, which is great, and we expect that to complete at City Council in early February. So the appointment will be finished in advance of the March meeting. And let's see, last item, substantive item I have is just letting you know that there are currently several positions open in the urban forestry team, and we are eagerly receiving applications. Those positions include botanic specialists in the forestry specialty, a supervisor in our tree maintenance operations team, tree technicians. Their city classification is not tree technician, rather it is development services technicians. And soon we will have tree inspector openings posted, as well as many seasonal positions working on things like tree planting and establishment, tree care in parks, and street tree inventory. So these are, I think we can say, good jobs, and they're doing work that we all think makes a difference. You included, I think. And these are real opportunities to diversify and otherwise improve the city's tree team. So please share these with your folks, your networks, and we will put links for those in the chat as well. That completes my report. As always, if you have requests for future reports, please let me know. Just shoot me an email. And if you have any questions, I can try to answer those now. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Jen. Adrian.
Yeah, quick question about that 10-foot rule, Jen. You know, what has been the Bureau's experience with how many, trees that ends up removing? And then also, what does the science say about that 10-foot rule? And, separate from the science, what's been urban forestry's experience with that in terms of how important it is? And is it species dependent? So can you just say a little more about that?
Yeah, I can do that briefly, Adrian, because we could spend lots of time talking about that. So that rule does not apply in removal cases. So trees cannot be removed because of that. It's just about planting. And however, there are many trees currently, large trees that have been there a long time within 10 feet of pipes that someday will be removed. And then we will have the problem of reestablishing in those spaces. And the science from a forest, this is the interesting part. There's engineer science, and then there's urban forestry and arboricultural science. From an urban forestry perspective, there is no conflict in these cases. There's feet of compacted soil and concrete between the pipe and the roots. The roots generally don't go there. There's not oxygen, there's not water, there's not air for them to live in those spaces. And other cities do not have this offset. And the trees that are currently there seem to illustrate that there aren't conflicts. We've never seen any issue between roots and pipes in those situations in the city. And that is what we have continued to communicate and are hoping we are demonstrating in each of these site-by-site projects that we're going through. I should say the Water Bureau's concern, of course, is that these are really big pipes that supply all of our drinking water, and they're very concerned at anything that might interrupt or break those pipes and stop water service and be a very costly thing to repair.
Good. Others? Questions for Jen, city team? Bruce, put your hand up.
Jen, do you have any information at this point as to who is the main contact at Dan Ryan's office for parks or for urban forestry, or is he? Yeah.
I don't. There's usually a person who receives all kinds of requests and information, and I don't know that at this point.
Okay.
But when he comes to see y'all, that would be a good question.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Jen. Looks like those were the set of questions, and we're right on time, and Claudio just arrived. So thanks, Claudio, for showing up here on time. We're actually on time, I'm happy to say, as well. So I'd like to turn it over, I guess, to Claudio directly, or Brian, do you want to do a little introduction or anything like that?
I think we could go straight to Claudio, unless Jen wants to set this up a little bit.
I would, thank you. Just to give a proper welcome and introduction to Claudio from other city staff. So Claudio Campuzano is the Parks Bureau's head of all things finance, real property, information technology. His portfolio is large. And from there, Claudio, please, with your budgetary expertise, take it away.
All right. Well, good morning, and I'm glad I could make it here on time right before I hopped on. A bunch of water started streaming through the side of my house into my basement. So, but I think we've got it under control. But just so you know, I may end up getting a little distracted at one point. My wife is on it though. All right, but good morning. As Jen mentioned, I'm Claudio Campuzano. I'm the Finance, Property, and Technology Manager for Parks and Recreation. Super happy to be here today to give you a quick overview on the budget process, review our base budget, and walk you through the guidance that we received for next year's budget, and finally talk about some proposals that we're bringing forward in our requested budget. Hey, Brian, you know, do you think you could run the PowerPoint just so that I can be hands-free? That would be super.
Yeah,
I think
sure
you've
thing.
got the PDF. So I know many of you, and always happy to come back to Urban Forestry Commission. So once we get that deck up, I'll get us started and just sort of situate folks in the process. So you can go ahead and skip to the next slide. That was just a quick little agenda that I want to walk through. All right. But yeah, so situating us in the budget process, you know, building a budget as large as ours and as complex as ours, you know, is actually more than a year-long process. You know, I only half joke that it's an 18-month process for a 12-month budget, but you know, even as last year's budget was just finishing up back in May, we were just starting our planning for the next year, beginning July 1, 2023. So we started updating our forecast, and my team worked with the director in May and June to develop guidance that was responsive to her priorities in the context of that forecast. And those priorities very much informed by all of the listening and learning, and I think you all have been updated on sort of the Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland effort. So really, you know, those priorities informed through a lot of the strategic planning effort that we're doing right now, and the guidance was issued in July. And I'll give a summary of the details on the guidance in a moment, but first want to take you through the whole process. So with the release of that guidance, divisions began identifying potential areas of investment, bringing those to the director as what we call pre-proposals, getting feedback from her, and then developing them into full proposals by early October. And so after proposal development phase, we started, you know, a decision-making phase using an updated 10-year forecast to help frame the task at hand. You know, as she noted in her guidance, as part of the decision-making phase, and I'll quote, we'll engage stakeholders to validate and provide feedback prior to recommending our plan to the commissioner in charge. And so that's really part of the process that we're in today. And we're actually bringing our proposal to our new commissioner next Monday. So really appreciate all the feedback that we get from you this morning. So right now, you know, we're finishing up the details on our base budget and changes, and we're preparing sort of all the voluminous information required required by the city budget office, and really the vast number of details that make up a budget as large as ours. And we're beginning, you know, that last sort of communication phase. At least that's the last part of our part of the process, where we develop, you know, all the narrative materials and that go into our submission, and then also our presentation for City Council in March. And so if you go on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the citywide process. So typically, we get the citywide general fund guidance in early December. This year it was late December. The forecast had close to no available resources, $6.5 million ongoing, and no general fund one time. But the good news is that the guidance also didn't call for a reduction, something that would have been a tall order with that kind of turnaround. I think we got it. We got the memo maybe a day or two before the Christmas holiday. So it would have been really challenging to implement at this point. So at the end of January, we submit what's called our requested budget to the city budget office. This is where the bureau specific development process ends and the citywide process really kicks off in earnest. The budget office spends February reviewing all bureau submissions and developing their recommendations for council. Then city council has a series of work sessions, usually about 30 to 40 hours worth, where they discuss and review bureau submissions and particularly cross-cutting issues that go across bureaus. At the end of April and at the beginning of May, the mayor issues his proposed budget, and that ties closely to the new tax forecast that we get coming out of April. As business license tax returns start coming in, along with they've got the same timeline as federal taxes. So when all that information is coming in, the city economist gives the mayor an updated forecast to sort of fit his proposals into that. And then finally, with input from community and amendments from the rest of council, the approved budget is voted on in May and then adopted in June for that July 1 start date to our new fiscal year. Thank you. So before we just dive into a discussion about next year's budget, these next several slides are really intended to give you a high-level overview of where our budget stands today in this fiscal year. Portland Parks and Recreation is a very multi-funded organization. This slide gives you an overall picture of those sources. We operate with 8 funds. They represent different sources of money that have distinct uses. And if you're following the bouncing ball, you'll see that there's only 7 on here. That's because there's an 8th one that's so tiny that it's not even really visible on this graph, and we won't really cover it. But our primary resource is the general fund. I'll note that while we call it the general fund, it actually has more than just tax resources, and I'll cover that in just a few moments. But as we move to the right, we've got our capital improvement fund, and you see the revenues close to $50 million. This is composed of system development charges in 22-23, debt proceeds for Build Portland projects, and a loan repayment for the city's grants fund. So, but all of that is really to move forward our capital program. In the upper right, you see the park's local option levy. All revenue in this fund is from the property tax levy that was passed in 2020. That's a levy of 80 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. And as you can see, it's really substantial increment on top of the general fund, our other primary operating fund and source of largely discretionary resource. So down below, you see a mix of what are mostly what we call enterprise and special revenue funds, Golf and Portland International Raceway, or PIR, are self-sustaining funds that operate solely using the revenue that they generate. Those are what we call our enterprise funds. And then the Portland Parks Memorial Fund contains a mix of what people have referred to as trust funds. You may have heard that term. And those are sub-funds set aside for specific uses. The ones that compose the vast majority of the revenue in this fund are, in fact, the Urban Forestry Trust Fund and the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund, which I'm sure this group is very familiar with. This fund also includes the Washington Park sub-fund that generates that's funded by parking revenue in Washington Park. And really, those three, the two tree funds and the parking fund, are really the main chunks of that particular fund. And finally, there's the grants fund, which is where we record state and federal grants. Advance the slide. Thanks. So where does the money go? Well, our single biggest expense is staff. It's unsurprising, and that's the big box on the left. After that, we spend a lot on materials and services. The external materials and services include everything from bark chips for playgrounds, consultant contracts, arts and craft supplies for summer camps, you name it. Very particularly, it also includes contracts for tree planting. It includes, let's see, what would be some other urban forestry related items, but really anything that's not people that we pay for. And then the internal materials and services are what we pay to other bureaus, and that number is primarily the Office of Management and Finance, and they provide us services like fleet, technology, facilities, insurance, procurement. I'm sure I've missed a couple, but those are all what we call internal services, and we pay another bureau to provide those for us or to partner with us on delivery of those services. So above that item, we've got capital outlay. This is what we plan on spending on the hard cost of capital projects. And then finally, the little sliver at the bottom is debt service, and that's primarily repayment of financing in our enterprise funds, golf and Portland International Raceway. And they have borrowed some money to do some capital work done for those operations. So move on. So just taking another slice at it, we're looking at revenue by type. So regardless of fund, so we just looked at it by fund, but now it's across all funds and really what the type of revenue is. And you can see that a large portion of our budget is made up by general fund discretionary. And that's really just that subset of general fund, which is the centrally allocated general fund tax resources. And those are shared across all of what we call general fund bureaus. And then you've got local option levy, which shows up here as taxes. In the top right, you see what we call charges for services. Those are all the fees we charge for our programming, and that's got a pretty broad mix. You got both golf and Portland International Raceway, as well as system development charges, which are development fees. So they make up a big piece of that figure. As we move into the smaller boxes, you'll see bond and note proceeds. As I mentioned before, we're being repaid by the grants fund, $20 million loan that we made to that fund, and the rest is for Build Portland bond proceeds to fund our capital work. Interagency work is work we do for other bureaus, and urban forestry is a big factor there. We earn interagency revenue for tree emergency work. And for some of our we do some tree planting for other bureaus. Then other groups also do other horticultural work. We do some permit processing as a bureau for PBOT's parking program, and they pay us for that service. And then there are a couple of other things. So intergovernmental is federal and state grants, and then licenses and permits include both non-parks use permits, which is when folks need to do work on our property. It also includes tree permits, and that's primarily for development activity. Non-development permits are not charged on a cost recovery basis, and in order to really lower barriers to compliance. But that also means they don't generate a lot of revenue. So largely the urban forestry licenses and permits are from the development function. Miscellaneous is just that. It's really miscellaneous. It's, and the biggest piece there is interest earned on our fund balances. So moving on. So this last slide, this last budget slide, you'll see the composition of revenues in the general fund. So like I said earlier, what is budgeted in the general fund isn't just tax resources. It also includes a number of other things. You see that the big pieces that fund our general, this is not inclusive of PIR, not golf, not capital construction. You'll see that general fund discretionary revenue is the biggest piece. The levy, which comes into this fund as reimbursement for levy eligible expenses, is shown as cash transfers. Charges for services are mostly recreation fees and parks permits. So you've got weddings, special events, sports field use, etc. Interagency revenue we talked about on the last slide, and the little boxes at the bottom are, they're too small to even contain names, but those are primarily permits, intergovernmental revenues, and miscellaneous. So with that, I move on to talk about guidance, unless there are any questions about that big picture. I know that that's a lot of information, but really just wanted to give a very broad picture of our budget before we jump into where we are today.
Hey, Claudio, just a quick question. Will these, and Brian, can we, do we have access to these? Did you mention that? Slides, at least even in PDF form, would be helpful?
They are not on the website yet, but I can add those right now.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, and my apologies. I actually, I think we were planning on speaking to this group a little bit later, and I think in the February meeting, and decided to pull that forward, and so the sort of a just-in-time item, and so I just I was only able to share these with Urban Forestry, the Urban Forestry team earlier this week. So my apologies for not getting those to you folks earlier. I know that everybody likes to absorb them. So
Yeah, Roberta?
Yeah, thanks, Claudio. Couple quick questions. Is the maintenance of parks facilities, would you say that that in terms of expenditures, does that primarily fall into the capital category or sort of the staff general fund category? And the second question is the revenues that come into the tree funds for mitigation and other things, do those, in terms of revenues, is that under miscellaneous or is that under permits and licenses as part of development?
it's a good question. I'll answer the second one first, and the answer is I'm not sure exactly how it's categorized. I would need to get back to you. Brian may actually know right off the bat. But going back to your first question, I would say that right now, given our sources of our resources, the biggest component of how we take care of our facilities is primarily operating. We don't have a very significant source of capital to maintain our facilities and other assets, both green and built. And so what that means is that over time we've generated what is probably our single biggest financial challenge, and that's a $500 million deferred major maintenance gap. So I'm not really covering that as part of this discussion, really trying to keep it narrowly focused on next year's budget. But yes, it's absolutely that is sort of the biggest challenge that we face in terms of achieving what we call a sustainable future, which is that balance between delivery of service and expectations and the cost to do so. So the life cycle of our assets is challenged. But we do spend, so when we look at our operating budget, our assets get daily and regular care through our land stewardship folks, through Urban Forestry, of course, through assets and development, which have our central services function. It's called professional repair and maintenance services. They do all of our carpentry, electrical, et cetera, really skilled trades. So we spend a considerable amount of our annual budget on what you would consider to be operating and maintaining our assets. But all of that sort of long-term recapitalization, the reconstruction, rebuilding, et cetera, we don't really have a significant source for that. We do get a little under $5 million a year from the general fund for specifically capital major maintenance. $5 million a year is a very small amount given the $1.5 billion of assets that we have under management and the $500 million of gap that we've got.
Did you say $500,000 or $500 million?
$500 million.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. Thanks. That's great. Thanks for that explanation.
All
right. So if there are no other questions, obviously I'm, love talking about the numbers. So if anything else occurs to you, feel free to come back to those. So heading into our director's guidance. So in July, Director Long issued her guidance to division managers. It began with some general direction and context setting, with many new positions still being filled, new facilities for those staff still being stood up, a lot of new ways of doing our work still being developed. And the key that really the key direction for 23-24 has been stability, and trying to minimize the additional incremental changes. The guidance indicated that there were a number of factors that would likely constrain the forecasts, with further, which further suggested caution, or a cautious approach to allocating new resources, and those included potential general fund cuts, which I'm happy that so far have not materialized. Continued high inflation. We've seen inflation well above 5, which is the collar for cost of living increases for city staff. So we expect to see that 5% increase, at least, we saw it last year, we'll see it this coming year, and likely to see it for at least another year to come. The market downturn will likely generate rising PERS costs, as we need to spend more on PERS to our PERS obligation increases as the market decreases, because we need to make sure that that's fully funded. And then there's an ongoing. We're currently in the midst of a round of collective bargaining. So as the director said, we'll focus on implementing the decisions that have already been made while we ascertain the impacts of those external forces. And so really focus on stability as much as possible. So we can move on to the next slide. I know this is smallish if you're on a laptop like me. So despite that cautious approach, there are still some areas that she wanted to explore. Changes to the budget, both with levy funding and other potential resources. The first big item is reducing cost as a barrier to access our programs. In recent years, our revenue forecast has been impacted both by intentional choices around reducing cost as a barrier, and also by the pandemic. And during the pandemic, first, it was reductions to revenue based on reduced programming and public health restrictions, and more recently, our programming has been restricted based on hiring challenges post pandemic. It's not really a thing, but as we move back into more normal operations, as a consequence, it's been very uncertain. We've had a very uncertain revenue forecast, and so each year we've been fine tuning the amount that we've been budgeting to backfill those historical revenue trends. The next priority is funding the operations and maintenance of new assets as they come online. So historically, O&M, as we call it, operations and maintenance for new assets in our bureau was funded with increased general fund discretionary. That changed with the Parks levy. In a joint memo to City Council, both PP&R and the City Budget Office agreed that funding O&M with Parks levy was reasonable, as long as we were all on the same page around establishing a successor resource for the Parks levy. The director's guidance directed us to build on that O&M approach, but really make sure that there's clear linkages to the capital plan as we sort of map that out over multiple years. So the next item in her guidance was workspace improvements. Really, with so many new staff, we're seeking new spaces. We've brought one online. We're securing a second lease in East Portland right now. But at the same time, many of our existing spaces, particularly our maintenance facilities that are the primary work locations for frontline staff, need additional work to make them safe, secure, accessible, welcoming, and really sort of equalize, especially as some of the lease space that we're bringing on is a very nice private market space that we want to make sure our staff are treated equally. And then Director Long directed to that, she directed the exploration of an approach for doing some near-term critical work to improve those spaces by using a portion of our capital major maintenance funding as sort of a repayment resource for some bigger projects. So converting some of that ongoing major maintenance money into near-term resource to do some bigger projects. With the urgency around developing additional tree canopy, and I know that I won't go into that. I know this group knows much more about that need than I do. The direction included the development of a proposal to substantially increase our planting efforts if an alternative source became available. And I don't know if this is a good time for Jen or Brian to jump in if you want to provide any additional detail there about where we are or any possibilities, or we can save that for later.
Yeah, let's save it for the specific asks, Claudio. Thanks.
Sounds good. So there are a number of one-time funded items in our current 22-23 budget that could potentially constitute ongoing programming. Most notably, the Ranger budget was increased by a little under $1 million through ARPA funding. That's American Reinvestment Plan Act. And the director asked that we explore whether those efforts should continue ongoing, and if so, how they might be funded. Recognizing that really with so much operational change happening and so many strategic efforts underway, we're really going to be putting a lot of pressure on subject matter experts throughout the bureau, not just at the supervisory and management level, but at the front lines, and they'll be pulled into projects, potentially creating capacity issues. So to address that, the director asked managers to identify where they might have some short-term staffing needs at the front lines to sort of backfill up through that subject matter expert requirement. So the next item, parks development, is related to the use of system development charge funding. Really with additional revenue in the forecast, we also have costs that have been increasing at historically high rates. I talked about inflation earlier. Construction inflation is off the charts, well into the double digits. And that's not just labor, but supply chain issues, et cetera. So this direction was really to review our existing list of projects and set aside funding in the SDC forecast to address cost increases before seeking any funding for new projects. And so while realignments to better deliver service and meet priorities are always in order, they were specifically called out as an option, given the fact that not all positions that have been allocated through the various investment cycles of the levy, not all of them have been filled. And so if higher priorities are surfacing and making themselves known, divisions should be looking to reallocate existing positions if possible, those existing vacancies if possible. So the next item is really being responsive to a budget note from several years ago, which directed the Bureau to request each year $500,000 of ongoing major maintenance. And so we talked about that slightly less than $5 million number. That has actually gone up in the last couple of years because of this budget note. And we would continue to do that, which is request $500,000 of ongoing general fund. And ideally that would stack over time to reach a more substantial and impactful number. We aren't going to be including that in our request, likely because of the mayor's guidance not to include any general fund requests at this point, but we're flagging it as being something that we'll still come back with later in the process when that general fund discussion opens up. So like I said, currently the Bureau receives about $4.7 million annually for recapitalization of our assets, and also about a little over $1 million for ADA transition plan work. Really widely acknowledged that it's insufficient, as I mentioned before, to manage our overall asset base. So finally, in the event that divisions identified areas where they anticipated difficulty meeting levy commitments, they were encouraged to highlight those gaps and identify resource needs to address them. So that's really a quick review of the guidance, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that before we transition to forecast and decisions. I see some chat items. Is there anything that folks would like me to cover?
See Bruce's hand up as well. And Megan. Bruce and then Megan.
Has there been any increase in money allocated for major maintenance in the last 5 years?
Yes, there has. I would need to come back with you with an exact number, but you'll see later on in this, we have $2.7 million that's allocated for. I'm sorry, was your question operations and maintenance or major maintenance?
Major maintenance.
Major maintenance, yes, there was. So last year, council included, so as we headed into this fiscal year, council included a budget note that directed city budget office to add $1 million to our major maintenance budget. I believe it was a budget note. I'm trying to remember now the exact form the decision took, but basically what they did was they said, we hear that you're asking for this $500,000 like we told you to. We don't have it this year, but we're going to build it into the forecast next year and next year's ask. So they put $1 million in, and I think that's on top of a $300,000 addition that they put in a couple of years ago. And so since that budget note has been put in place, if I'm remembering correctly, and I would need to get back to you on this, I believe it's a total of $1.3 million increase of ongoing major maintenance to that fund. So
is it accurate to say the major maintenance fund is growing faster than it's currently being dealt with by Portland Parks and Recreation?
I think that it's fair to say that we have a balance in that fund. We've got projects that are to which it's been allocated, and those projects are moving forward. They haven't, many of them haven't spent down yet, but they are all moving forward. And if you're interested in the list of sort of that, I know that we had that in our last year's adopted budget, but can also give you an updated version if you're interested.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to jump in with a quick time check. We have about 12 minutes left for this item for the next one. So,
okay, great. So then let's just go ahead and jump to the next slide. I'll cover this quickly for the sake of time. Base budget, we're not looking at significant changes to program. And we already talked a little bit about some of the expense pressures. I talked about collective bargaining. One of the sort of downsides to having such a multi-funded bureau is that we only get general fund to sort of offset the costs of the general fund components of any cost increases like inflation, like collective bargaining. So those collective bargaining increases and inflationary increases really impact the levy forecast and constrain our ability to deliver on the levy promises. The good news is that we've got got additional levy in the 5-year forecast. We've seen some upside there over the forecast that we had going into the year. So that 2.4 is actually over the life of the next 5 years. So it's a little under $500,000 increased forecast. So little pressure taken off there. But so why don't we just jump right into the urban forestry related packages, and I'll turn it over now to Jen to kind of walk through. She knows these way better than I've got my spiel on them, but we got the experts in the room.
Thank you, Claudio. And I'll ask Brian, he's the main builder of these with the management team, to jump in as needed. So you see here a list of what our packages are. So these are different asks that we have put in given the director's guidance. So right now, before any of these happen, if they happen, urban forestry's annual budget, including what we draw from planned use of our trust funds, is around $13 million a year. So if any of these happen, there'll be additions to that. First up, urban forestry management plan. We are working on the update, and that includes hiring consultants to work with us in terms of researching and developing the plan with public input, as well as a community engagement consultant. You've both heard about that. So there's funding requested in there for that. Also, tree preservation and compliance team. Dun, da, da, da. We've been trying to do this since 2015, implementation of beginning implementation of Title 11. At that time, we were given 2.5 new positions to implement the tree code. The tree code added every private property to our portfolio in the city. Prior to Title 11, this is just an illustration of the scope of the change that Title 11 brought in terms of workload. Prior to that, urban forestry was only involved on about a third of those properties. So since 2.5, we've been trying to build up. And as you all know, build up to provide that service that we are required to provide to implement the city's code. One of the areas that we have had to put on the back burner is compliance. This means enforcing the city's regulations regarding trees. Presently, when we get called about compliance issues, we do what we can to respond, but we don't have a real compliance program like Bureau of Development Services or PBOT or BES has. So this package is 6 positions to do that work. And the 6 positions comes from an analysis of the volume of code compliance issues that we see and needs we see following up on permits. For example, we know 2,000 required trees per year generally don't get planted because we're not following up on those permit requirements. So that's in there. The next one is a permitting tree inspector. We are still routinely challenged to keep up with the volume of applications for tree permits that we get. We would like to be very fast on those rather than as slow as we are. We have a number of ways we're working on that, including that compliance team. They will take some work off of the current tree inspectors' plates. And we're also trying to add this position to help with that, particularly for non-development permits where we are slowest. So where there's no property disturbance involved, it's just a street tree or a yard tree. The next one, arborist trainees. For several years now, we've been trying to develop some workforce development capacity to diversify arboriculture and urban forestry. And this is one of the good opportunities we have to do that. There is a city classification of trainee for our arborists. So the request is for 3 of those positions that we can start a real program with. We now have supervisors, thanks to the levy, who are building that program with help from industry associations that have done that kind of work, so that hopefully we can get more women and people of color into the arboricultural field, starting at our shop. The next one, equity and urban forestry permitting. You've heard about this in previous meetings, but we started a pilot program to waive certain permit fees for low-income customers. They're usually the low-income property owners that have to get the permits. So funding to continue that. And the planting program expansion. This is in response to Director Long's directive that Claudio shared earlier for tree canopy partnership opportunity. So this would be staff whose job would be, instead of doing the work out there, whatever it is, education, outreach, planting, stewardship, being a resource and a partner and building partnerships with others to build their capacity and their expertise so that the whole community is really working on trees together. And we are supporting that. And the total there, it looks like, is 1.6 million. Is that what that means at the bottom, Claudio? I'll leave that one for you.
Yeah, no, that's right. So I didn't really want to break things down into little pieces, but the total list comes to about $1.6 million.
Brian, anything to add or correct?
Nope, I think that covers it well.
Thanks. Back to you, Claudia.
I see a couple of hands, and actually the slides that I have left really provide the larger context for the rest of the bureaus asked. So maybe for the sake of time, we can skip those and focus on questions, because I'd rather give you information you can't get otherwise.
Okay.
I think I saw Daniel's hand first.
Thank you, Claudio, for explaining this to us. Very easy to understand. So thank you. And Jen, thanks for going over this. A couple of issues. The first one is, and I know this comes up quite a bit, and we've heard it for the last few years, the need to add new staff positions for issues relating to complying with Title 11. I am wondering, and I'm putting on my taxpayer hat here, I am wondering if when we do the Title 11 improvements or changes that we have that are going to be taking place over the next couple of years, looking at changes to Title 11, that we look at opportunities for simplifying the code so it's not as difficult to comply with, so we won't need as many people and as many new positions. Easier said than done, I recognize that. But I just want to flag that as something that at least gets looked at when Title 11 changes are made. And Jen, you answered my other question. When I look at this equity and UF permitting, it does say provide tree permit waivers. I think it means provide tree permit fee waivers. So in other words, if you're low income, you don't get a waiver from the tree code, you get a waiver from the fees. But you did explain that, so thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying that,
That's-
Daniel. I didn't
That's
even
what you get
notice.
when you get slides built by a finance guy. All right, Roberta.
Yeah, thanks. And a question for Jen, I guess. To what extent, if at all, was any discussion of something like a pilot or continued progress on a street tree maintenance program analysis or development considered as part of the budget? I was also kind of hearkening back to one of Claudio's slides that talked about increasing O&M or dealing with O&M to take on assets as they come online. And we have, this several billion-dollar asset that's already online that's not getting maintained at all. And so given that it's on the radar, was this considered at all, or is this being considered in some other context?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Roberta. Very important to all of us. It is being considered in other contexts. To answer that, primarily the Sustainable Future, excuse me, which Claudio mentioned, which is a parks project to find new reliable sources of funding that will continuously provide for things that parks needs to provide in services. And one of those specific goals for Sustainable Future is street tree maintenance funding. There's also been discussion by some of you, as a matter of fact, around the Equitable Canopy Initiative in PSEF in some way around street tree funding. However, that has not been an expressed goal of that funding at this point. So really Sustainable Future is the answer.
All right, Adrian and then Megan.
Yeah, I noticed it looked like for Portland Parks and Rec, maybe it was about 20% of funding was supposed to be, was currently supported by fees. And I was wondering, number one, is that correct? Has that been the same historically? What is the expected good amount? And then I sort of have the same question for urban forestry as a subset of that.
So I'll jump in with an answer bureau-wide, and then I'll see what I can do to answer the urban forestry question specifically. So I think you are referring to the sort of the big sort of tree map chart that had charges for services about 45.5 million. So that is, keep in mind that is not just our that's not just how our operating budget is funded, but also how our capital budget is funded. And so the biggest component of that is system development charges. And they've been coming in a little over $20 million in recent years. Historically, and our history isn't very long there because the program has only been around for about 20 years, and we just did a major revamp of the fee methodology a little under 10 years ago. So we don't, and that new fee methodology, along with a huge building boom in the last decade, meant that we hit about $40 million a year during the peak. So that charges for services chunk is very, very significantly tilted towards the capital side, and specifically toward the development of new assets to meet the needs of a growing city. However, historically, we've earned the second biggest chunk is for charges for services, particularly is in recreation, where I think it's historically been around $14 to $15 million, and that was pre-pandemic. And just to give you a sense of sort of what the combined effects of sort of pandemic and pandemic and the intentional choice to reduce costs as a barrier, those revenues are down close to $10 million from 15. So So one of the big pieces of our budget is it continues to sort of fine tune that as we both sort of come out of the pandemic and also get a better sense of what it takes to bring folks into our programs that have historically had barriers. So that's the big piece. With regard to urban forestry, maybe Brian and Jen can speak to that a little bit more. But my general sense is that the biggest components of urban forestry's revenues track with development, and to the degree that they do, that has been a similar trajectory as SDCs, which is peaks a couple of years ago, drops in recent years, leveling out with a lower than expected drop and more optimism on the upside in coming years.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The $13 million budget that Jen referenced, about 1.5, 1.6 million comes from development fees, and another about $400,000 on the non-development side. Mostly those are the $100 fee we charge for tree removal permits.
I want to do a quick time check. I know there's still hands up. I can't see whose, but before we conclude this agenda item, we were hoping to talk about, hear from the commission if you would be willing. We'd like to request that you write a letter to support the budget request that Urban Forestry's put forward. So I just want to make sure, Vivek, that you see that's a goal in terms of timing.
Yeah, thank you. Megan?
My comment is really quick, more to circle back on what Roberta had said. I am our representative to the Budget Advisory Committee. So I just want everyone to know every single time I get a chance, Claudio knows this, I talk about street tree maintenance. And we are talking about it as part of Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland, and Sustainable Futures, right? And really trying to identify it through those different funding sources. So I just don't want anybody to be dismayed that we're not trying to talk about it. But if there's ever something that people want brought forward from the Urban Forestry Commission, please do let me know, or I can always pass along the resources from those meetings if that's more actively appreciated. So just wanted to share all of that.
Thanks, Megan. So on that note of trying to discuss a letter, part of this is, yeah, I just turn it over to you, Jen, if you want to bring that up and see where we go with it.
What I would propose is that the commission, provided you're willing to say you support the urban forestry request, that you select a person or two who will work with Brian to craft a letter to send and vote to do that. This is what the Parks Board does for the sake of efficiency and not having to go back and forth at meetings. And of course, this is going to the commissioner's office next week. So we might not make that, but we'll do our best. So that's my proposal for you all to consider.
All right.
And just a quick note in terms of timing. Yes, our requested budget goes to City Council and City Budget Office next Thursday. However, we've regularly updated our submission online with additional letters. So, I think that the input from this group is always welcome, and if it were to take a little bit longer than the next week, that is not going to be an issue.
There's a question in the chat, Claudio, maybe you can help with, and from Roberta, who would the letter be to? I would think it's to our director, it's to our commissioner, and it's to City Council. Just do them all,
Yeah,
right?
I think that works. I think that having it be to both City Council and the director, so capturing our commissioner as well. I think that this commission, and in fact, I would actually go back to city code around the charge of the commission. I believe that the code gives this group the responsibility to advise City Council, and so that would probably be the most appropriate audience.
Roberta, your hand's up. I just wanted to
it's just a follow-up. So if there isn't a letter in time to accompany the budget proposal to Commissioner Ryan's office, what's the best timing to get a letter to Dan Ryan's office and the council? When are they going to be paying the most attention? You know, I mean, there could be more than one as well, but if it's basically to support the ask. The other thing would be is, you know, it might be helpful, and this is bigger than this discussion, but there may be other aspects of city budget that affect the canopy, you know, that affect urban forestry and in other bureaus' budgets. And I'm not familiar with those budgets, so it might be helpful if maybe the staff could, to the extent that there are things that could benefit trees in other bureau budgets. We also are charged with commenting on other bureaus' plans and programs affecting the urban forest.
Yeah, one thing that I'll just getting to your first question, best timing, I think that probably sometime before City Budget Office finishes their reviews, they occasionally / often refer to stakeholder thoughts when they're making their recommendations. But really, I think that you know, when we include something like that in the you know, when we sort of add to the submission that's online, we send to individual offices as well to make sure that they've received it directly. So I think that it'll get their attention, and as long as it's there before City Budget Office gets too deep into their reviews, would probably be most appropriate. With regard to sort of citywide tree impacting decision making, I would say that if I had to bet, I would bet that there's going to be some joint work session in March that will discuss a lot of that. I think that's one of the very classic sort of cross-cutting issues that would be on the table for a sort of a multi-bureau discussion in City Council as they're doing their budget work sessions. So but we'll definitely keep you posted on that.
All right. For sake of time, I'm wondering if this is something is this a policy committee letter? Is this a kind of a budget advisory rep in collaboration with the policy committee letter? Trying to think about if we want to kind of just, at least for now, have a subcommittee work, consider writing a letter and go forward with this process so that we can kind of move. I see Nick Desai here, so we can move to the next agenda item. Thoughts on that? Daniel?
Yeah, we don't have anything specifically so far on the policy committee's agenda for this next Monday. This is something we could certainly do. Although I'm wondering if, as long as we're going to vote today to potentially allow the policy committee to do this, I think there's an opportunity here that goes a little bit beyond what we've talked about today. Going along with something Roberta mentioned about the fact that there are other city bureaus that are also preparing their budgets. I would love to be able to, in a letter we did, put some additional language that addresses that larger issue. So for instance, you know, we've talked a lot about the Portland Clean Energy Fund, and Bureau of Planning and Sustainability is the manager there. You know, I think there's a great opportunity here to kind of urge the city to take on street tree maintenance costs, and even if this goes way beyond the parks budget, but just to mention issues like that issue in particular, and urge the city to come to a way for funding that, even if it goes beyond the parks budget. So, I mean, that's kind of what I'm thinking. And thanks, Roberta, for mentioning that, because I think street tree maintenance is an example of how, you know, we're looking at advising the city on urban forest, not just maybe the urban forestry budget. So just my thoughts there.
Thanks, Daniel. Sounds promising. If we get so to reiterate, if we get some additional information of other cities and their particular budget components that relate to urban forestry, that would help with this letter writing. Is that right? Okay, Roberta, clarification?
Question, for Claudio, I guess, and Jen, if the policy committee were able to draft an initial letter that addresses some of those other issues as well, and if we had time to, over the next month or so, to learn a little more if there's something in BES's budget that we want to support, or something in PBOT, these pilot projects, there's some good stuff happening there. Is there time to bring a draft letter to the Forestry Commission at the next meeting for approval? In other words, it would be from the commission on commission letterhead from the whole commission. That would be, mid-February. Is that reasonable timing to interact with this process?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's right in the middle of the CBO review of budgets. Very frankly, I think a lot of council will wait until they get their CBO reviews before they really dive into any of the other materials. So I think that's a perfect time.
All right. Excellent.
All
Well,
right.
thanks. I don't think there's anything more there.
All
Claudia,
right.
thanks as always coming in. Bruce, I know you're tempted to ask a question. If you could put it in the chat, we'll get back to you on that, as I'd love to make sure we have enough time for Nick and moving on.
Well, thank you all. It was great being here. Oh, I appreciate the generosity with your time. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claudio. Thank you. Just to be clear, Vivek, so the plan then is the policy committee is going to work with Brian on a draft, and that would be voted on in February. So you're thinking there's no need to vote on that now?
I think sounds right to me. In part, I mean, policy committee can move forward on the discussion, and then they can come forward with a recommendation to say, we're putting a letter together. Can you all review it before the February meeting? And we're planning a vote at the February meeting. I think that sounds like it could be a very easy step-by-step process. Is that timing work? I know it's going to be a month.
Yeah, Claudio said yes, so I'm going to go with that. But I want to make sure Brian is available. Sorry, Brian, to do this to you now. Yes,
that's
for the
fine.
policy
Yep.
committee. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Yeah, thanks all. Well, moving to the last item on our agenda today is a bit on the forest inventory, urban forest inventory and analysis. And this is facilitated by, as you may recall, from our Heritage Tree Committee meeting, Nick Desai. Thanks, Nick, for coming in. Good to see you, and look forward to talking a little bit about stuff I spent a lot of time in my spare time thinking about. So I'll turn the floor over to you if you want to just give us a little summary. I know Brian sent some materials to kind of set us up on this, but turn it over to you for kind of setting us up. And then if there are any questions or feedback you're looking for to get us thinking about that while you're presenting this as well.
Great. Thanks, Vivek. Good to see you all. Good morning, commissioners. As you recall, my name is Nick Desai. I'm in our Science and Policy Work Group, and excuse me, I'm joined here today by my colleague at the U.S. Forest Service, the local Pacific Northwest Research Station. Her name is Suzanne Owen, and Suzanne's going to be presenting with me. We're going to provide an introduction to what the Urban Forest Inventory and Analysis Project is, and some of the ways that you can view data, specifically using an application called My City Trees. So I'm going to hand over the mic to Suzanne. She's going to introduce herself and kick off our presentation.
Great, thanks, Nick. Can you all see my screen and hear me okay?
Yes, welcome, Suzanne.
All right, well, thanks for the invite. I'm excited to share some of this information with you all. Yeah, so I work as an analyst for the Pacific Northwest Research Station and the FIA, or Forest Inventory and Analysis Program. And part of my job is to help with urban data quality checks, report writing, data requests, and really just helping to expand the program. So yeah, Nick and others with Portland Parks and Rec have been really supportive partners, helping with things from data collection, review, and all the steps towards publishing the data. So it's really nice to be able to have this opportunity to present together again. I will just plan on giving some background information on the Urban FIA program and products. And then we'll give a little tutorial of the My Cities Trees application. And I think there should be plenty of time for questions at the end too. All right, so FIA, or Forest Inventory and Analysis, is a national USDA program with 4 regional units. So PNW is in purple here. And this is a really long-term monitoring program. It uses these standardized plot design to continuously monitor our nation's forests across all land ownerships. And this program has really evolved over time from being more of a regional specific timber survey back in the 1930s to now more of an all lands, all trees survey. And it provides, information on the current status of forests, helps identify trends in forest conditions, and track how forests are changing through time. But before 2014 and urban areas were included, a lot of trees were falling through the cracks because of how FIA defines a forest land. So FIA defines forest land as an area that's at least an acre in size, 120 feet wide, not developed, and maintaining a canopy cover of at least 10%. But as you all know, a tree is a tree, and all trees improve the quality of life. And so in 2014, the Farm Bill was expanded to include urban areas in the most populous cities. And this is a really good thing because these urban trees really have more of a direct impact on the daily lives of over 80% of the population. Of course, they provide habitat and store carbon, but they also can do things like reduce heating costs and cooling costs and air and noise pollution and a lot more. So this figure is showing the operational in bold text and the proposed cities in light gray text that are part of the urban FIA program. The PNW Research Station has 2 operational cities here in Portland and in San Diego. And there's a plan to expand the program into Washington next year in partnership with Washington DNR. And there is a minimum target of about 15 cities for the PNW Research Station. Most of these are in California. But I like looking at this figure because it shows, just how far we've come since 2014 and looking at all these cities. So urban FIA is using the same methods across the country, storing all this data in the same national database. And so I think eventually you'll be able to make some really interesting comparisons. All right, for Portland's inventory, this is just an example showing public plot locations. Actual plots are confidential, but this 10-year measurement cycle was accelerated in Portland and completed during a single field season in 2018 by Portland Parks and Rec crews. And then remeasurement began in 2019 by FIA crews. And sometimes we still work together on plots and for remeasurement. Other cities might choose to collect their baseline data over a course of multiple years, but by accelerating this inventory, the data and some of the products are available sooner. All right, this is an example of an urban plot, not in Portland. This may be like New York or something, but this picture kind of highlights some of the challenges, like different ownerships and access to plots compared to traditional forest FIA plots. Each plot is about 1/6 of an acre in size, where condition and tree data are collected, and then sapling measurements are taken on these smaller micro plots. And then, the urban FIA program really has 3 main components. So there are the core FIA measurements. These are similar to traditional FIA forest plots, but the plots are sampled within census-defined urban areas. plus some urban specific variables that I'll show later. And then iTree estimates, which add, estimates of ecosystem services and the monetary value of the urban forest. And of course, local partnerships are critical with helping things like, sampling and funding and local expertise too. So I'll just talk about these things really briefly next. These are just a small sample of some of the variables that are measured. So this is the first one. These are all core variables are collected. They include things like different land condition variables, tree variables like species, diameter, height, other estimates such as cubic foot volume and biomass and carbon in tons. And there is sort of a push to keep things nationally consistent, but there are some regional variables that are also collected. Things like different methods for down woody material or forest insects and diseases that are specific to a certain area. And then we collect these more urban specific variables. So this includes things like different land use designations, percent cover variables like of buildings and impervious cover. And then also some tree variables like, urban specific damages like severe pruning, tree use variables. So are the trees growing in maintained areas or are they street trees? And then things like distances from trees from trees to buildings. Some of this information is used by iTree to calculate things like energy savings. All right, and then the last component of the urban FIA data collection is iTree estimates. So these are estimates of ecosystem services provided by urban trees, things like pollution removal and energy savings. This publication here by Dave Nowak is Understanding iTree. This is helpful for understanding some of their equations that can be pretty complicated. So they consider things like particle interception by urban trees and how that affects pollution removal. Let's see. And so then, I just wanted to pop this up. So this website here just shows the different tools from iTree. All of these are free. They can be used from a cell phone, and they do things like estimate all the benefits of an individual tree on a property or multiple trees. It could be important for homeowners that are considering tree removal. There maybe they would reconsider knowing some of the services that each tree provides. And then just wanted to show some of these. So iTree estimates really add a lot to urban FIA. These are some examples of estimates for Portland's ecosystem services. So things like pollution removal, avoided runoff, carbon sequestration, reduced energy use, even reduced health effects. And these dollar amounts mostly represent savings compared to having no trees. And then this compensatory value describes like the total replacement value of trees, which tends to increase with tree size and tree health. Okay, so how to access the data and learn more about the program. So urban reports, field and database manuals, even some publications and tutorials are available at this link. And I can share these in the chat if there's interest. And then the data, there's three main ways so far to access the data. And these different resources, they kind of differ in terms of expertise and effort needed to use them. And then also the different types of analyses you can do. And I'll just sort of briefly describe each one before we go into the My Cities Trees application. This first one the Urban Data Mart. You can download CSV files in an SQLite database. It's definitely the most flexible in terms of types of desired analyses, but it also requires coding and some knowledge of FIA methods and database structure. This Urban Stats API is coming soon, hopefully in the next few months, is a little bit more user-friendly. It will include a manual that you could refer to, and I think they've done a really good job of outreach, asking city partners and analysts what are some of the really common estimates that managers are looking for. And this one you don't need coding for, and I think it'll be really a valuable tool once it comes out. Okay, so now we'll talk about the My Cities Trees application. This is the easiest of all three tools to use. This tool, it was created by Rebecca Zender and her team at Texas A&M University in collaboration with the Forest Service. It has the ability to categorize urban data by several spatial themes that are selected by each city partner. And it can also produce these really nice downloadable reports. Only cities that have completed a full set of baseline data are featured on this, but new cities are added each year. And then the data is updated with each new inventory as well. But this is what it looks like. So if you go to this website, this screen pops up and you click open application, and then you can select a city. So we'll go through some examples with Portland. And the examples we're showing are from the 2018 data. This has been updated since with newer inventory. So once you select a city, the sample boundary will show up, and some other information here on the left side. It shows, approximate acres surveyed, some population data, and the number of plots that were sampled. This is using, I think, 2010 census data, and so this will also be updated as well. Let's see here. So then, so we selected Portland. And also, so it's kind of cut off here, but if you go right over past this line here, you will find a help button and at the top of the screen. And if you click on it, a document will pop up as a PDF. Right now it's available in both English and Spanish, but it's really helpful. It includes information about the application and how to use it, a little more detail about where the estimates come from, and then some contact information. Okay, so next, Nick will describe some of Portland's themes and show some examples with the inventory statistics function.
Thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, so we've selected Portland, and now we select a theme. And themes function as filters for viewing conditions in different geographical divisions of the city. And each participating city chooses its own themes based on local resources and interests. So for Portland, we have land cover, and actually land cover is one of the themes that is consistent throughout each city. So each city has to have a land cover theme. And that describes water areas, forested areas, developed, undeveloped areas. Then we have, for Portland, we chose zoning because it's interesting to look at industrial, commercial, residential, and open space and how canopy might differ across those zones. And that's one of the unique aspects of the UFIA, that we actually have data on this. The third theme that we have is an equity-based theme describing race and income demographics, the intersection of which, and I'll go into a little detail about that one in a little bit. Then neighborhood coalitions, we do look Portland, we look at North, Northeast, East Portland, we look at the city in that way. So that helps us to That's another window for viewing the canopy here. And then finally, Heat Island, which is illustrated here. And this map probably looks very familiar to you. Suzanne, next slide, please. So once you select a theme, and I should mention, yes, that Heat Island map is the work of Vivek Shandis and Jackson Vogel. And we use that data to create this map. So once you have a theme selected, you can select classes. The classes are different levels within the theme. And that arrow pointing down shows the class selection area. And you can toggle on and off the different classes. And this helps you filter the data through those classes. So just to show you, up at the very top, there's a little banner at the very top of where the website would be. It says My City Trees, it says Portland, Oregon, it says Heat Island, and it says 1 of 5, so that we've selected one class out of the 5 potential classes there. We are looking at the hottest parts of the city. And now on the next slide, we can zoom in on this a little bit, and you can see that the class descriptions have an info button, and that will take you to the data sources and methods. And in this case, this is that paper by Vivek and Jackson. And on the next slide, we'll show you how to view those statistics through that filter. So we are looking at the hottest parts of the city. And as you can see, when you select, and we were going to do this live, but we weren't quite sure how well it would work. So we have these static images for you. So thanks for your patience as we walk through them. But you select the highest burden, hottest parts of the city. You can see that this accounts for 5% of our canopy. And only 5% of our canopy. And the 3 types of trees estimated to be most common in these parts are cottonwood, vine maple, and willow. And then let's see, there's some other ways we can look at data here too. On the next slide, for comparison, we can look at the coolest parts of the city. So we've toggled, switched the toggles, and we see that the coolest parts of the city is where 37% of live trees 1 inch diameter and greater are. And the species that we see here are bigleaf maple, western red cedar, and Doug fir. Now, another way to use the inventory statistics feature is to select a different categories. So you can look at stem count, you can look at carbon, volume, the value of trees in different parts of the city, pollution removal, and also health impacts. And they are each reported separately. So you have species, and it reports, here we see Doug fir accounts for 44%. And in this case, you'll notice at the very top, we have all land cover classes selected, 6 out of 6. So we're looking at the entire city here. 44% of the city is, or we have Doug fir accounting for 44% of carbon function in the city. Now on the next slide, we're going to look at how we can look at canopy data through the lens of the equity matrix. So a little background, the equity matrix used here was based on a model developed by Peabot, actually. And they looked at the intersection of race and income to understand geographically where vulnerable. The equity and inclusion manager at Peabot that developed this methodology, and we borrowed it and have used it for some of our programs too, especially our planting priority project, as a way to determine how to direct resources that we have at Urban Forestry. So we included this mapping model here, and we can take a little bit of a dive into understanding how different communities are affected by, let's say, pollution removal. And so what we have done here is we have selected equity as the theme, and then from our classes, we'll toggle on the highest disadvantaged or most vulnerable and the lowest disadvantage parts of the city. And so that would take us over to the next slide. And here's our comparison. So we have, looking at them both side by side, we see that 68% of pollution removal occurs in the lowest disadvantaged communities, whereas only 3% occurs in the highest disadvantaged communities. And it's interesting to see that Doug fir contributes to the most pollution removal. And then on the next slide here, as you can see, we can also just look at the maps, the maps that are created from these different themes. And it clearly illustrates the relationship that we see when we look at the equity matrix and heat island and the implications for potential role of canopy to address heat, pollution, and better health. So it's a pretty fascinating way to look at the canopy. And now Suzanne's going to talk to you a little bit more about some of the other features with My City Trees.
All right, thanks, Nick. Okay, so right next to this inventory statistics is the species statistic button. So this will show a full list of tree species, and data can be broken out by ownership, diameter, and land use categories. This function can help answer some interesting questions. The examples I chose were, what is the number and volume of ash trees by ownership? So just thinking about maybe the potential impacts from the emerald ash borer, and then also which trees, store the most carbon across different land uses in Portland. So for the first question, I selected species by ownership. And then I selected the category count. And these estimates do include trees with at least 1 inch DBH. This table shows that the estimated number of all tree species across both public and private land ownerships. You notice that total tree counts do tend to be higher on privately owned land in blue here. And all of these columns are sortable. You can sort high to low. And then you can click this button here and export an Excel file where you can sort out different species. So for this example, I just sorted out the different ash species. And I use this function for both tree counts and volume. So these figures are just showing that there is a trend for more live ash trees and greater ash volume on public lands versus private. And the majority of trees and volume are from Oregon and European ash with the darker blue. I will say that one thing that these figures are missing, you might notice, are standard error bars. So that is really important to keep in mind, especially when you're looking at individual trees, that standard errors could be quite high. But this program, gives you a general idea of the trends, but like for any data request or anything like that, I would use a different program and provide those standard error bars. All right, and then the next question, to understand which species stores the most carbon across different land uses, we click the species statistic button, species by land use, and selected carbon, and just sorted from high to low here. And these figures are created automatically in the program. This just shows the top 5 species that store the most carbon are Doug fir, bigleaf maple, western red cedar, Oregon ash, and Norway maple. And most above ground tree carbon storage is in forest and residential land uses in green and yellow. This screen also has, these are throughout the program, but if you just feel like you need a little more information, they're helpful. Just click this and it'll give you a better description of what these land use descriptions are. Okay, and then these custom reports can be created. So these summarize estimates of all inventory statistics. Estimates will apply to the area and theme selected. And the report is generated as a PDF, so you can easily save it or share it. And I think there's an option to email it directly from the tool itself. This is an example of like the front cover of one of the reports, and I'm happy to share some of these with you guys if there's interest too. But yeah, you just reports are produced by selecting first the city and theme and classes that you're interested in, and then just click generate report. And it does take a little while, but it generates approximately 30-page report with figures and tables and lots of useful information. This is the example of the table of contents. Include lots of good information like tree counts, wood volume, carbon, compensatory values, and some other ecosystem services here. And if there's time and interest, we could give you a live demonstration, but that is all for this part of the PowerPoint. But I just want to mention that all these really good urban products and applications are from a huge group collaboration. The urban program is still fairly new, so yeah, it's great to be at this point where we can share results and new tools and help to grow the program as well. So we have some time for questions, or I'm happy to show like a really quick live demonstration to you if that would work.
All right, thank you, Nick. Thank you, Suzanne. Really appreciate this. Really amazing to see how much progress has been made over the years. I've been tracking this for a very long, since its beginning, and so it's great to see where it's come over the years. There's a few questions in the chat. I encourage you to just take a look and see if you can respond. We're closing up with time here, so Bruce, if go ahead, ask a question, and simultaneously look at it. Look at the chat as well as possible. Or what?
How often are surveys done?
On a yearly basis, we are collecting, I think, 10% of plots being remeasured. You're on mute, Bruce.
No comparative data is available yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, not yet year to year, but one of the benefits of this program is that it's a standardized protocol that's being used in cities across the US. And so we have a standardized way to compare canopy according to this protocol. Also, it provides information across all property types, which is something that some of our other canopy estimates do not. I do see a few more specific questions in the chat, and realizing we're out of time, we can provide some information via email to address these questions, and I'm happy to talk if anyone wants to set up a meeting time to call, or we could come back with some follow-up information at another time.
Yeah, this is so interesting for decision making and trying to think about the urban forestry management plan coming up. So a lot of really good resources here. Thanks again. Daniel, quick closer.
Yeah, thank you both Nick and Suzanne. Your slide about in Portland, what species of trees are sequestering the most carbon. I'm wondering if you sort of normalize it to look at species on an individual basis, as a mature tree, which of those common species are going to have the best capacity at a mature level to sequester the most carbon? I'm just wondering, in terms of like tree planting now for the future, what trees have that potential to maximize carbon sequestration?
Suzanne, I'll let you field that one.
I was going to say it's a really good question. I was having trouble finding my mute button after sharing my screen. Sorry about that. Yeah, that is a really a good question, and I'm not quite sure how to answer it. Nick, you may be more familiar with what species the do well and grow the fastest after planting and such. So there is information on how we calculate the estimates, and I can share that with you, but I'm not sure if it would be able to answer that question or not. I have to look into that one.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and I'm sure there are like all these variables that go into it
Yeah.
too, because urban
Yeah.
trees versus, wildland trees of the same species. So.
Yeah, they grow so different, and it is a real headache for our statistician to figure that out. Yeah.
Well, good. Thanks again, Nick and Suzanne. We'll be back to you. It'd be great if you could get back by email and just work with Brian to kind of follow on with responses to questions. Otherwise, I want to close up the meeting today. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, city staff. Really appreciate your contributions. Discussion. We'll follow up next month. It sounds like an in-person meeting for those of you who can join at the Portland building, and otherwise have a great rest of January and early February. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.